Hey there, welcome to Nightmare FM. Tonight, turn off the lights, get comfortable, and let the sound of gentle rain guide you into these terrifying horror stories. Whether you're trying to sleep or just love a good scare, you're in the right place. If you enjoy what I do, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Now relax, and let's begin. The monster my family lived with had rules. I was 13 when I learned what happens when you break them. The Zolg was there before me, as much a fixture of my life as gravity or air or the sense of my own body. It exists in even my earliest memories as a constant warning against carelessness. It was there when I brushed my teeth, giggling in the bathtub. It was there stealing food that fell under the table at every meal. It was there sitting above my bed, stroking my hair with hands the size of dinner plates. Every morning there were new rules, all learned from close calls that happened the day before. Every week we reviewed its effect on us, how to improve, how to be smarter, how to be safer. For a long time I couldn't even distinguish the rules made for it and the rules made for us. Don't touch the oven when it's on. Be careful of the kettle. Don't play with plug sockets. Don't put cables in your mouth. Watch where you step. Never use any appliance without first checking the wiring. Always help Daddy look for the Zolg as he backs out of the driveway. Rules upon rules upon rules, growing in number and complexity until we felt stifled, all of us slowly going mad from the suffocating need for constant vigilance. Other teenagers had fun, other teenagers stepped away from the rules and embraced freedom. That's what adulthood was meant to be about, or so I thought at the time. But not for me. The rules just kept growing. Eventually, I realized that other families don't have Zolgs, just us. There's only one of him, and whatever inexplicable force brought him into existence saw fit to put him with us. For years, it had never occurred to me to evaluate its presence as anything other than a simple fact of life, but when I saw the madness for what it was, something inside me changed. A hatred crystallized into an icy core. I was filled with memories of his little egg-shaped body and lanky arms with those huge yellow-green hands. Whole nights spent listening to him waddling down the hallway as he scratched his dangling yellow fingers over the walls, gagging at the things he'd sneak into Mum's cooking, crying at every dead animal left on our doorstep. I hated that stupid thing. I hated it so much that one day I snapped and lashed out. Whack! I hit it so hard it flew off the table where it had been dancing on my plate, and it hit the wall with a satisfying thud. I expected my mother to fly into a rage at this blatant transgression of family law, but instead she just ran up and held me, stroking my cheek. It felt like a nightmare, my mother clutching me and everyone crying and shouting while that thing laughed from where it lay. Why didn't it hurt? Hadn't I hit it? And then, as slow as a sunburn, a red outline of my own hand formed on my face, and I came to learn exactly what it was the Zolg was after. It wanted us to hit it, to kick it, abuse it, kill it. It wanted our malice, our frustration, our carelessness. It wanted nothing but our suffering, and anything we did to it just came back onto us. 100 times worse, 100 times as slow. You should see what a broken bone looks like when it takes 4 hours to render into existence. Bone looks like putty being pulled apart by a child. Skin reddens and depresses into long, streaky welts. Layers of tissue and membranous flesh pull apart laterally until finally it all tears with glacial slowness. It looks like quivering despair, like grief, not screaming agony, because when pain is that horrific and that unstoppable, you don't yell or cry or shout, you give up. You retreat. You turn catatonic and switch off, or you just die. And the Zolg, despite its rock-slide teeth and leering grin and hillbilly giggle, is smart and patient in surprising ways. Every time I touch an oven or a car, or even just a light switch, I need to think 1,000 things over. Did I remember to check the walls? To look at each and every plug socket? Have I seen the Zolg anywhere? Has it got its grotesque mouth clamped around a cable just out of sight, waiting for me to plug it in or switch it on? Has it wrapped its mouth around the exhaust of my car, ready to suffocate? Every action and consequence has to be thought out in the most explicit detail. Every bump on the road has to be investigated lest it turn out that the Zolg has cleverly watched you for days, traced where you work so it can slip out one night and waddle breathlessly to an ideal overpass bridge. My brother once broke 2 ribs when it managed to leap in front of a ball he went to kick. My sister spent 3 weeks in hospital after she poured bleach down the kitchen sink, failing to notice that the Zolg had unscrewed all the pipes and was waiting to gleefully gulp down poison. I'm the only one left now. My father was the first to go, not because he was careless, but because he always took it upon himself to do as much as he could. You couldn't even turn the TV on without him insisting on pressing the button for you. It always felt so controlling, so stifling. But once he was gone, it became pretty clear why he did it. It was never the same without him. Mum tried so hard, but it was never the same. She had her own fears, her own struggles to contend with. I really can't blame her for not being able to do the work of both of them. I remember coming home from school and they were waiting for us in the living room. My older brother had gotten back before us and was sitting silently at the kitchen table, tears welled up in his eyes. God, that was the hardest. Dad looked, well, he almost looked relieved. But seeing my 19-year-old brother cry was like a breeze block to the face, and in that instant, I knew something horrific had happened. They hid him away. I still don't know exactly what happened, but I made a pretty good guess from the state on the lawnmower that Mum dragged out to the curb and the fact we wouldn't see the Zolg again for at least 8 days. I'd later learn that in moments like that, it'll stow away and knit itself back together slowly, which at the very least explained the giggling I heard coming from the linen closet during those horrible silent nights. Dad never did scream. I'd hazard a guess that he killed himself, and I know I should feel some relief, but I glimpsed his body on the way out, and the thought of those injuries happening to a lifeless corpse just sends shivers down my back. We never mowed the grass again. It was a loss too great, and over the next few weeks, Mum deteriorated. She started drinking, crying late into the night while my brother would cook us food and tell us that everything would be okay, but it never would. Never again. She only got worse. She might have had a chance if it was just us. But we couldn't just abandon our vigilance, our paranoia and fear, and we had to carry on as normal. Jesus Christ, we even had to check Dad's coffin before burying it. For a while there, she almost came back. Looking back, it couldn't have been more than a day or two at most, but she did manage to set the table for us. Just once. We were all there, Dad dead and buried, and none of us having seen the Zolg since his death. When from upstairs a door slammed shut and Mum was so startled she dropped the food she was holding. Its flat, hairy feet slapped down the stairs one by one while its heavy, wet gurgles punctuated our horrified silence. With a sort of mounting disbelief, I watched it walk up to the table that obscured its stumpy little body from my view and drag itself up onto one of the chairs. Dad's chair. Dad's place. Mum had even set a plate for him, if only by instinct. And you know what? It didn't look at me, or James, or Lori. It looked at Mum. It knew what that single gesture would do to her, and it laughed the whole time we had to pin her down and stop her from driving a knife right into its face. It gibbered and howled with such joy at her threats, but we stopped her from doing it. And after that, I don't think she was ever the same. That was when the drinking started. It was also when James became the new favorite. It had always shown a special interest in Dad, and without him around, it fell on James to become the focus of its attention. We always thought we'd been doing such a good job, but without Dad, things felt 1,000 times harder. James was injured 6 times in as many months, and things were never much better after that. I remember he took me fishing. He asked Mum to keep an eye on the Zolg and stop it following us, and we went together. And for a few blissful days, it was just us and no one else. And he told me all about the lessons he had learned in the last few months, told me about the Zolg's favorite resting place, some of the intricacies he had deduced, and more importantly, that I would have to steel myself and be ready for what happened if he ever failed. And like all of them, he eventually did. But not before we found Lori crushed to death. We think she dropped the microwave on it, but we can't be sure. It was her first week at university, and she didn't even call to tell us, but we knew she was aware she'd done it because she called in sick to all her classes a day early. And then she just locked the door and let it happen. We didn't even realize the Zolg had found her, but it had somehow, and the sight of her lying on her bed, pulped to the thickness of a few planks of wood as it giggled and jumped on her broken remains, will forever be lodged in my mind. I like to think she found a way of ending it, but I don't know that at all. She could have sought help, something to ease the pain, I'm sure of it. But we don't know for sure, and I have to wonder if she felt it all, every second of it. She was in there all alone for at least a day and a half. James disappeared for a few months after that, and it was just me and Mum. When James finally returned, he stank of booze and had this haggard look about him, and I couldn't help but wonder what he'd done in that time. "It'll get me," he said, "sooner or later. I just wanted a taste of what life had to offer. All the good, all the bad." But later he would confess that he just tried to run away and lost control, heady with the belief he'd escaped the Zolg and downtrodden by the guilt of what he'd done to us. Except the Zolg had followed him, slowly and carefully and relentlessly it had followed. You can leave it behind for a while, but it won't be cheated, and somehow it finds its way to you. Even if you're on the other side of the world, it'll get to you, and it'll never take more than a week. James must have known that, but he tried anyway, moving from place to place and doing God knows what. He lived with that guilt until his death, even though I never gave his lapse a second thought. We were all just trying our best. I tried so hard to make him see that, to make him forgive himself, but there was nothing left for him except a dark spiral downwards. He'd brought habits back with him, and with little else to do, he let those habits grow into their own ugly monsters that rivaled even the Zolg. I still don't blame him. His suicide note was so rational, so thoughtful. He really had convinced himself he was doing us a favor, but the fact he died by pumping the Zolg full of heroin tells me he had other ideas. It was a good attempt as far as ways to beat the Zolg go, and it was with great despair that I first saw his face and realized he hadn't won anything at all. No one will ever know exactly how it happened. The Zolg, at least, spent 4 days crying in a cupboard, but James died nonetheless, and it didn't look like he'd died in ecstasy. His eyes were hollow, his skin gaunt and leathery, and his jaw had dislocated in a scream so terrible you could fit an open hand in his mouth. However the Zolg had twisted and reinterpreted the poison in its veins, what fell on James looked like a ritualistic murder gone wrong. Like a possessed corpse had gotten trapped in a box and left to rot while the demon within raged and bent its host in terrible spasms. I didn't even tell Mum the details, but I have to guess she knew, even if she was barely present by that point. In her sunken eyes and loose skin, I saw a pale reflection of James and came to accept that even when the Zolg doesn't get its way, it still doesn't lose. The months that followed were hard. Mum was barely in her 60s, but she was being eaten alive by grief and fear. Towards the end, she wouldn't even leave the bed, too afraid to risk injuring the Zolg. I became a full-time carer and paid my own price in the process, trapped in that house while constantly working to keep the Zolg away from her. Every meal took hours to prepare, every moment of relaxation brought crashing down by either Mum or that thing. It became brazen after Mum went catatonic. It started throwing things at me, playing with the idea of open attack as it smashed plates or slapped my phone out of my hand. I ignored it for the most part, relegating it to the back of my mind while the stress ate away at me like a cancer. There simply was no other choice, or at least so I thought. I used to sit and watch it stare at Mum. Sometimes I'd venture to try and push my buttons using her as a prop, but I simply ignored it until it finally gave in and just her slow and agonizing death. It marveled at her bed sores, laughed when I cleaned her, and chuckled with joy as her hair fell out. And somewhere along the line, I decided that it wasn't right for it to get so much pleasure. All of us were suffering while it was having the time of its life. If it was within my power to stop it having that little bit of joy, to deny it that happiness, then it only seemed right that I do so. But what did that mean? I think I knew the very first day I realized how happy her pain made it. I just didn't want to face up to that fact, so I pretended otherwise. But some things can't be buried. They linger in the back of your head like a guilty pleasure. And no matter how much you tell yourself you won't do it, that it's a line too far to be crossed, deep down you always appreciate that you can cross it, if you need to, if you want to. When did I first want to? I'd say, with complete honesty, that it was when I had to carry her to a bath, and I stubbed my toe on the bedpost. They say you should fear the man who delays reaching out to take something they want. But I didn't wait very long at all after that moment. I was quiet, calm, effortless. No conflict or worry was worn on my face. I merely took a deep breath, took her to the bathroom, and drowned her. My mother didn't feel anything, but the Zolg sure did. For the first time in its life, it directly attacked me, scuttling down the hall to come skidding around bathroom door and then leap at me with fists flailing. But that fat, hairy little egg didn't have it in it to stop me, and it yowled and cried and wept and clawed at my exposed legs as I bent down and drowned my mother in the tub. It practically tore my calves to shreds, but I didn't care, not one bit. And oh, how the irony rolled in, because right before my eyes, its own legs began to bleed and wilt, and the panic in its eyes betrayed the subtle inversion of rules we'd never figured out. Until then. When it was over, I didn't know what scratches were from her trying to escape and which were from it, and I slumped to the side and laughed at the absurdity of it all. The little bastard was hunched over and vomiting a greasy mixture of hair and bile, and its wretched, jaundiced eyes wept tears of pus. And I just kept laughing at it, just like it had always laughed at me. I even imitated it, holding my hands over my stomach and fake sobbing, just like it did to us at Dad's funeral. And then I wheezed with joyous giggles when it ran out the room, cursing me in its weird language. Whatever force binds it, that kind of murder messes with it in unpleasant ways. And with that leverage, nothing was ever quite the same for it. It spent weeks weeping in the attic, but I found it and dragged it out into the light and watched it wither and struggle. I am quite sure it would have died if I'd followed it up with another kill, and then another. But there's only me left, and I can do nothing except savor the quiet victory of causing it such longing despair. It's still stuck around, of course. If anything, it's more determined than ever, but I don't think it'll get me. It's also growing older. God knows what their lifespan is. I've found maybe 2 written references to them in my entire life, so it's not like I can just check Wikipedia for an update. But it is getting older, thinner, closer to the grave. It's just a thing, after all. Maybe it won't happen in my lifetime, but I absolutely won't be having kids. And I look forward to the thought of that stupid thing left old and alone in this world. It'd probably spend its remaining days dancing on our graves, but jokes on it because we'd be free, and it'd still be down on Earth playing its stupid game against players who have all left the table. Unless, of course, it just goes and finds another family, in which case, well, now you know how to kill it. My wife Lynn and I have been together for 6 years and married for 11 months. Our entire history together has been very normal, and never once have I noticed any weird behaviors or red flags. I can't stress enough how out of character this whole thing is for her. Lynn is very kind, intelligent, and thoughtful. She's always been the no-nonsense type of person. Being childish or trying to scare me is not something she'd normally do. She doesn't even like watching horror movies. When we first started dating, she agreed to watch The Shining with me because she knew how much I loved horror. She was so scared that she didn't even make it through half of the movie before we had to turn it off. She isn't into anything creepy and has never been into pranks. It's just not her cup of tea. And that's fine. But that's what was so strange about this. It's just so unlike her. I should also add that she never had any mental health issues, and as far as I'm aware, it doesn't run in her family. I know some people are able to hide their mental health problems, but in the 6 years we've been together, I think I'd have seen some sort of sign. 2 months ago, I was in the kitchen making myself some coffee before work. I was running a bit late that morning and knew I wouldn't be able to make it to Dunkin' Donuts for my usual morning fix. I took a sip of my coffee as I hurried down the hall towards the front door when I happened to notice Lynn peeking at me from around the corner ahead of me. I could only see her eyes and a strand of her long dark hair hanging against the wall. The rest of her body was concealed behind the corner. I nearly spilled my coffee when I saw her. I did burn the heck out of my lips. "Geez, Lynn," I said, wiping a few drops of coffee from my pants. "You scared the absolute crap out of me." She immediately popped out of view like a little kid that had been caught. I heard her scurry off towards the living room, and by the time I got to the front door, she was out of sight. It was really weird, and just totally out of character for her, like I said, but I also found it kind of funny that she was being more playful and a little less serious. I shouted that I loved her and called her a weirdo. As I shut the door behind me, I heard her laughing. Her behavior was a bit odd, but it certainly wasn't something to call a priest over. I forgot about it by lunch, and by the time I got home, she was her normal self. I didn't bring it up, and neither did she, and life went on. The next incident happened 3 days later. It was around 2 a.m., and I had woken up to get a drink. I was standing at the kitchen island, jug of OJ in hand, when I felt a strong feeling that I was being watched. For whatever reason, I looked down at the floor and saw my wife's smiling face staring back. She was peeking at me from the other side of the island, staring up at me with wide, unblinking eyes and grinning. Grinning like the Cheshire Cat. I screamed, "I'll admit it," not out of irritation, but fear. For some reason, at that moment I was scared. At the sound of my scream, Lynn scuttled backwards out of my view, her hands and feet smacking the tile floor as she hurried out of the kitchen on all fours. I didn't run after her, or even yell after her. I just stood there, frozen in shock, wondering what the heck had possessed her to do that. It took me a little longer than I'd like to admit to go back upstairs, but I eventually did. When I got to our bedroom, Lynn was lying on her side, asleep, or at least pretending to be. I stood there for a while, watching her breathing to be sure she really was asleep. I had the feeling she might jump out at me the moment I got into bed, but she didn't. I climbed into bed and she didn't even move. Her breathing was soft and deep, and I was starting to wonder if I'd dreamt the whole thing. The next morning I waited for her to come down for coffee, and after handing her a mug and kissing her cheek, I decided to ask her about it. "What was that about last night?" I asked, keeping my tone light so I didn't offend or embarrass her. She frowned over her cup of coffee, shaking her head like she had no clue what I was referring to. "You were peeking at me again. From over there," I said, pointing to the spot on the floor by the kitchen island. She followed my gaze, and when she looked back at me, she burst out laughing. She laughed so hard that I couldn't help but join her. "You creep me the heck out sometimes, you know that?" I said. She giggled and set her cup on the counter and wrapped her arms around my neck. "You creep me out all the time, so I guess we're even," she teased. We said our goodbyes and left for work. As I drove, I kept thinking about how creepy it had been seeing her grinning at me from behind the island like that. The sounds her hands made on the floor as she crawled away. I told myself she was just trying to be silly, just trying to join me in my love of all things horror. It's not like I was afraid of her, but it still didn't sit right with me. I started seeing her peeking at me more and more. Sometimes she'd be peeking out from behind the couch or living room curtains. Once she even managed to get inside her grandmother's old trunk that sits at the foot of our bed. I might not have even known she was there at all had the trunk's old hinges not given her away. She'd had the lid propped up just enough so that only half of her face peeked through. She'd been grinning like an excited toddler. It was unnerving. I didn't even know what to say to her. All I could do was stare. When I finally found my voice, I asked her why on earth she was doing this. She didn't answer, but she slowly closed the lid, shutting herself inside the trunk. I just walked away, feeling disturbed. I didn't understand why she was doing it, but it clearly made her happy. I just hoped she would tire of the game quickly. Lynn didn't peek at me for the next 2 weeks. I started to think she was done with her weird prank, and I was relieved. We were watching a show on Netflix one night, and I jokingly said that I hadn't seen her peeking at me lately, and that she must have given up on her spy game. She looked up at me with a small smile and said, "Maybe I've just gotten better at it." I didn't say anything, but I wondered whether or not she was joking. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. Was she still peeking at me when I wasn't looking and I just hadn't noticed? And if so, what the heck was she getting out of this? I started to feel paranoid, constantly checking whether she was watching from around the corner or behind a door. I was jumpy whenever I was home, and she wasn't in full view of me. I felt stupid and a little crazy. But after a few weeks without another incident, I began to relax. I stopped checking behind furniture and walls and told myself it was just a bad memory. Then a few days ago, things got so much worse. Lynn left to go to a friend's, and I lounged on the couch and played a couple games on my laptop. Around 9 p.m., I hopped in the shower, and as I was washing the soap from my hair, I felt that awful feeling that I was being watched. I slowly opened my eyes and almost had an absolute heart attack. Lynn was peeking from behind the shower curtain, her entire head stretched into the shower, leaving just her body outside. Her long, dark hair hung against the curtain, the ends dripping with water. Her mouth hung open in a terrible grin, eyes wide and red, as if she hadn't blinked in a while. I screamed and jumped back against the wall. She didn't move, nor did her smile waver. Her makeup ran down her cheeks in 2 black streaks. She looked giddy and completely deranged. I was absolutely terrified. We stood like that for a few moments, neither of us saying a word. Finally, after what felt like forever, she slowly pulled her head back out of the shower, and I watched her blurry figure through the curtain as she moved backwards towards the bathroom door. A second later, the bathroom door slammed shut, hard enough to rattle the mirror. I screamed again and jumped out of the shower to lock the door. I stayed inside the bathroom for over an hour. Maybe I overreacted to some of you, but joke or not, I wasn't going to put up with the crazy crap anymore. That's what I kept telling myself as I paced in my bathroom, stopping to listen at the door every few minutes. Suddenly, I heard a muffled sound, and I pressed my ear against the bathroom door, straining to listen. I couldn't hear anything, but I envisioned Lynn standing on the other side of the door, giggling at her joke. I felt a surge of anger. I was beyond pissed at being made to feel scared in my own house and made to hide in the bathroom for an hour. All for what? Some joke? If it was a joke, it was an awful one. "What the heck, Lynn?" I snapped. "This crap is getting really freaking annoying." I waited for her to apologize or to call me a jerk. But instead I heard a faint moan, so quiet I wondered if I heard it at all, and then complete silence. "Lynn?" I called out, not able to even hide the shakiness in my voice. I got no response, just my own heavy breathing. "I swear to God, just freaking stop it," I yelled, pounding my fist on the door. I waited for her to cuss me out, something I would expect from me talking to her like that. I had never screamed at her before. But there was nothing, just the occasional drip from the shower head. I won't deny that I was scared, too afraid to open the damn door and face my own wife. I waited another 30 minutes or so, which feels like an absolute lifetime when you're scared. Finally, I decided I wasn't going to spend the night hiding in my bathroom, so I got down on my knees and peered under the door. I almost expected to see her face peeking back at me, but thankfully I didn't. I could see straight down the hallway to the top of the stairs, but no Lynn. I didn't know if I should be happy about that or not. I looked for a few minutes, waiting to see her head pop up over the top step, but it never came. I stood up, my hand hovering over the door, and mentally prepared myself to open it. I slowly turned the lock with shaky fingers and was about to yank it open when I heard a sound that still makes me feel nauseous when I think about it. A moan, louder than before, but this time I was able to tell just where it was coming from. I turned my head to the closet door as if in slow motion and locked eyes with my wife, who was peeking out at me from the slight gap. Her eyes were still wide as ever, and her mouth was hanging open in the most grotesque, gaping smile I'd ever seen. I didn't even scream. I was too scared for even that. Her hands were clasped to her chest, body trembling with sheer delight, as if she could barely contain her excitement. A short, raspy moan bubbled up from her throat, deep and raw, sending a shiver through my entire body. Somehow, I found the ability to pull the bathroom door open and ran as fast as I could all the way down the steps, snagging my keys and phone from the table in the living room before running outside to my car. I could hear her shrill laughter behind me, but I didn't hear her getting closer. I didn't bother shutting the front door. I drove away from the house faster than I legally should have, shivering the entire time, either from fear or the cold. Maybe a little of both. I hadn't grabbed a coat or even a pair of shoes. I was still in my boxers and my hair was still damp. I drove straight to my brother Chris's house about 40 minutes away, ignoring any and every call and text I got. I didn't check my phone until I was safely parked in my brother's driveway. Lynn had called 4 times and sent a flurry of texts, all wondering where I'd gone and why I left like that. I threw my phone at the dash in a rage, furious at her nonchalant attitude. My brother and his wife were surprised to see me, especially dressed in just a pair of boxers, but told me to stay as long as I needed. Chris lent me some clothes and asked me what happened. I told him Lynn and I had a fight, but didn't get into the details. I didn't want him to think I was overreacting, leaving my wife over a prank, even if it was a strange one. I mean, hadn't I encouraged her for years to lighten up instead of being so serious all the time? I had wanted her to relax and loosen up, but this was definitely not what I'd had in mind. I tried to sleep on their sofa, but my brain wouldn't let me sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lynn's face staring at me from inside the closet. Knowing she'd been in there with me the entire time made my skin crawl. She'd never left the freaking bathroom at all. Instead, she slipped inside the closet and slammed the bathroom door shut to fool me. The mere thought of going back home gave me anxiety. I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Chris ended up giving me a sleeping pill, so I was able to get a little rest. My sleep was filled with terrible dreams, all of Lynn's smiling face. I woke up just as the sun started to rise. My sore body ached from the sofa, and I felt drained. I knew I'd have to call Lynn at some point, but I didn't know what to say to her. I wouldn't be going home unless she gave me her word she'd never do any more creepy crap. I just wanted my wife back. Her normal, serious self never looked so good to me. I was contemplating calling her and telling her that when that familiar feeling came over me. I was being watched. I was staring at the ceiling, my heart in my throat. I didn't want to look away, but the longer I ignored the feeling, the worse it got. My eyes drifted away from the ceiling almost on their own. Her face was pressed up against the window beside the couch, staring down at me with that same gaping smile. Drool dribbled down her lips, leaving 2 long streaks down the glass. I didn't know how long she'd been there, but something told me she'd been there quite a while, possibly all night. I didn't bother screaming, though my fear was entirely overtaken by the anger I felt at that moment. I jumped up from the couch and pounded my palm against the glass. "Lynn, are you crazy? What the hell is wrong with you? Just go home," I shouted. "Now!" She didn't move, and her ghastly expression never changed. If anything, her smile only grew, as if she had never been more elated. I could hear Chris and his wife moving around upstairs. As if Lynn could hear them from her place outside, her head twitched slightly in their direction, and she began to close her mouth slowly. Chris called my name from upstairs, obviously concerned. I turned to see him and his wife Rebecca hurrying down the steps. When I turned back to the window, Lynn was gone. The only sign she'd been there at all was the 2 streaks of drool still dripping down the glass. I tried explaining to Chris and Rebecca about waking up to see Lynn watching me through their window. They were skeptical. Who wouldn't be? Chris and I went outside to the spot in front of the window, but there were no footprints in the dirt, just a slight indent. Animal, probably, Chris guessed, and I didn't argue. He and Rebecca assumed I dreamt the entire episode, but they didn't understand, and I was too tired to explain it to them. I called out of work that day and turned my cell off. I didn't want to face Lynn. Just talking to her was too much for me at that point. I really started to believe something was irreversibly wrong with her, that no matter what promises she made, we'd never be the same again. The thought saddened me to my core. I cried most of the morning. By noon, I figured I was ready to confront her, give her one last chance to explain herself. I could at least give her that after 6 years, I told myself. I turned my phone on and saw the dozens of texts she'd sent, all from a seemingly concerned wife. "Can we talk? I love you. Please call me. I'm really worried. Can you answer? Just come home." And more of the same. All texts telling me she loved me and she wanted me home. How worried she was. Not a single one addressing the crazy crap she pulled, like she hadn't been acting like a character from a Stephen King book. Even her texts were different. She normally texted novels just to tell me to pick up a loaf of bread. You'd think she'd have more to say to me after her bizarre shenanigans. I know it probably seems childish to some of you who are miles away from this situation, but if you saw the way Lynn had looked at me, how she scampered away on all fours like some wild animal, grinning at me from inside the closet like a lunatic, then I think you'd find my reaction was warranted. I ended up staying with Chris and Rebecca for another night. I didn't wake up yesterday until afternoon, and thankfully I didn't see Lynn's face watching me through the window. I don't want to pry because it's not my place. But is this fight something that can be mended? Rebecca asked. She'd made us both a sandwich for lunch, and I knew she wanted to broach the subject without seeming to be nosy. I don't know, She's like a different person, I said, choosing my words carefully. I still wasn't ready for her or Chris to know the full extent of the complete craziness I had been dealing with. People change, Ben, but she's still the same woman you married. Maybe you both just need to talk through your issues. Whatever's going on, I'm sure it can be fixed, she said, ever the peacemaker. I think it's beyond that now. I don't think talking would help. I just don't trust her, I said. The words stung in my heart. I missed and loved my wife. But how could I live with someone like that? Living in constant fear didn't sound too appealing. Lynn loves you. She has to be absolutely crushed, she said. I don't know about that, I said. Well, she certainly seemed like it to me. I've never seen her so upset. Very much unlike the Lynn I know, Rebecca said, shaking her head sadly. It took a full minute for her words to really sink in, and when they did, I felt dread worming its way through my skin. Wait, what do you mean? You saw her? You saw Lynn? I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. Rebecca nodded casually, as if that fact wasn't nightmare fuel. Maybe for her it wasn't. She stopped by this morning just after Chris left for work, she said, cleaning the plates from the table. I didn't see her car, though. Maybe she took an Uber or something. Becca. What did she say? Did she come inside? I asked, sweat starting to break out on my forehead. I began looking around, examining corners as though a predator lurked behind them. No, she just asked if you were awake yet, and I said that you weren't. I asked if she wanted me to wake you, but she said no. Just said to let you sleep, she said as she washed the dishes. That's all? She didn't say anything else? I asked. No, she looked awful though, like she hadn't slept in days. I think you should call her. I got up from the table and thanked Rebecca for lunch. I felt a little bit better at the knowledge that at least she hadn't come inside. Still, I needed to double check that the doors were locked. I sat for a while trying to figure out what to do next. I didn't want to go home, but I felt that I owed it to Lynn to help her if I could. Hadn't I sworn an oath to love and honor her through sickness and in health? Clearly she was very sick. If she was sick, which I truly believe she was, I had to try and get her the help she needed. But I didn't even know where to start. I didn't want to call the police, and besides, what the heck was I going to tell them? That my wife was peeking at me? That she was being creepy? As bizarre as she'd been, she still hadn't committed any crime. Not yet, anyway. The police would have probably said that I was overreacting. But this wasn't some prank. It felt wrong, dangerous even. Like something sinister lurked beneath her smile. I knew as her husband I was well within my rights to have her committed, but what if she simply acted normal in their presence? She'd obviously been able to fool Rebecca into thinking she was just a concerned wife. As long as the doctors didn't find her a danger to herself or others, they'd have no choice but to release her after 72 hours. I felt lost and overwhelmed, so I did what any husband in my position would do. I called her mother. I didn't want to, believe me. Her mother, Marianne, and I were never on the best of terms. We'd never fought or anything like that. She just wasn't a very warm person and wasn't really easy to get along with. She hardly ever smiled, and when she did, only her lips would move into a thin-lipped smile, leaving her eyes as blank as before. She gave off this aura that felt like she was permanently on the offensive. I'd only met her twice, and both times were for such short visits. I got the impression she didn't approve of me for her daughter. Lynn always ushered us out quickly, as she didn't want me to feel uncomfortable, which I was grateful for. Being in her mother's company felt almost unbearable, like walking on glass. I was glad when we moved 3 states away so we didn't have to see her often. I was happy to avoid the woman, but I needed her help. I really didn't want to talk to her at all, but I had to talk to someone, and someone who knew Lynn better than I did. So I grit my teeth and did what I had to. Yes, she answered, already sounding irritated. Marianne, it's me. Ben, do you have a minute to talk? I asked. I could hear her cluck her tongue in irritation. I'm in the middle of writing some checks, but if you insist, I suppose I can spare a moment. What is it that you want to discuss, Benjamin? She said coolly. It's about Lynn. She's been acting strangely, and I was wondering if you had any idea whether there was something. I was quickly interrupted. It's a bit difficult to follow your rambling, Benjamin. What is it that you want from me? She asked. I could almost see her standing there in her thin sweater and slacks, tapping her fingernails impatiently on the table. I wanted to know if you'd ever noticed any odd behavior, or possibly any mental health issues, I asked. There was a long, uncomfortable pause that I couldn't tell was because she was just thinking or something else. Finally, after a few seconds, she spoke. I'm not sure if this is one of your jokes, Benjamin, but if so, I don't find the humor in it. Now I do have business to attend to, as I've said, so if you don't mind, she said, but I cut her off before she could get rid of me. Marianne, it's not a joke. I'm sincerely concerned about Lynn's mental health. Her behavior has been very erratic lately. I'm very worried about her, and I figured as her mother, you would be as well, I said, my frustration evident in my voice. If you're truly concerned, then I suggest you get the health professionals involved. I don't know what you expect of me, she snapped. I could tell she was seconds away from hanging up, and for some reason I was desperate not to let her. I had the feeling that she knew a lot more than she was letting on. Please, if not for me, do it for Lynn, I tried. I heard a faint, shaky intake of breath, as if she were trying to hold her steely persona together but failing. Marianne, I started. Benjamin? I don't know what to tell you. My only advice would be to seek professional help. Do not call here again. Goodbye. I tried to call out to her, but she'd hung up. I tried to wrap my head around the call and her refusal to help me. Even if she didn't like me, why wouldn't she want to help her own daughter? I couldn't understand that. I tried to replay the conversation, desperate to find something I missed. After a while, I almost gave up, until I remembered her last words to me. Seek professional help. She'd said those words with a bit of urgency. I could have just been grasping at straws, but no, I was sure her voice had changed ever so slightly when she'd said that, as if they were very important. What had she meant? I assumed she'd been referring to medical professionals, but maybe she was referring to someone else. Someone that she didn't, for some reason, feel comfortable saying directly. Or maybe I was just desperate. I waited for Chris to get home, and after a very long and exhausting conversation with him and Rebecca, I convinced them that Lynn truly needed psychiatric help. I didn't tell them everything. I wasn't prepared to go into it yet, but I told them about our last encounter, how she'd hidden in the bathroom, peeking at me from the closet. They were obviously shocked, but thankfully they believed me. They too just wanted to help her. Still, they didn't think it was all that serious. Weird maybe, but not dangerous. They just kept saying that Lynn had to be playing some kind of weird joke. Maybe for YouTube, Rebecca offered, if only half-heartedly. Chris didn't think we should involve the police just yet. He offered instead to go with me, and I readily accepted. He reasoned that calmly talking to her, trying to coax her into going willingly, was the best recourse. I agreed to do it his way. At least I wouldn't be going into that house alone. We drove over this morning just after breakfast. There was no way I was going at night. When we pulled into the driveway, my stomach began doing somersaults. Her car wasn't there, but I still didn't let my guard down. The front door was ajar, and for a split second, I thought we'd see her eyes staring through the gap. I was shaking and starting to sweat. Chris, however, was fine. He waited for me to open the door, his hands in his pockets like he was going on a freaking stroll through the park. I envied his ignorance. I pushed the door open and was immediately hit with the stench of rot. Chris smelled it too, and he walked in the house behind me with his nose scrunched up. "What do you guys use to clean the floors around here, crap?" Chris mumbled. "Shut up," I said, my eyes darting around for any signs of Lynn. The house was deadly quiet and dark despite being 10 in the morning. All the curtains were closed up tight, refusing to allow any sunlight inside. If I hadn't left it just 2 days prior, I'd have thought the house to be abandoned. We moved through each room, carefully checking any place that she might hide, occasionally calling her name. "Why the heck are you looking under the couch?" Chris asked eventually. "Aren't we looking for your wife?" He was looking at me like I was a moron. "Let's just go upstairs," I whispered. He shook his head but followed me up the stairs to check the bathroom and spare bedroom. On the way up, my shoes crunched over pieces of glass that looked to be littered over a few of the steps. I noticed that one of Lynn's and my wedding portraits that hung on the wall along the staircase had been smashed. The frame hung crookedly, all the glass removed. I stared at the picture, a lump forming in my throat. We had taken the photo just after leaving the church, after saying our vows. She looked so beautiful in her white gown. I looked at Lynn's beautiful face. I never dreamed her face would ever be a source of terror for me. We climbed the rest of the steps and checked the spare bedroom. But it looked completely untouched. I was hesitant to go into the bathroom, my fear from that night coming back to me all at once. Chris noticed and offered to go in by himself, but I couldn't let him do that. So we walked in together and checking the closet and the shower. The bathroom looked as if it hadn't been touched since the night I left. "I don't think she's here, Ben. Why don't you pack some clothes and we'll try coming back tomorrow or something," Chris said. I nodded and went into our bedroom and shoved some clothes into a duffel bag. When I checked inside our closet, I came across the source of the smell and gagged. Chris took one look and lost all color in his face. He had to go stand by the stairs to get away from the sight and smell. I gazed down in shock at what lay inside my bedroom closet. Soaking into the rug were at least a dozen eyeballs, all carefully laid out in pairs. Some were as large as a quarter, while others were as tiny as a marble. I stared down at the eyes she'd collected from small animals, and I wondered how she'd gotten them, and shuddered at the thought. "Man, I thought I had it bad with Becca's shoe addiction. But good grief, your wife's in here collecting eyeballs," Chris said, gagging. Ben, I think we should go, he called from the hall. I'm getting nauseous. All right. I grabbed my duffel and shut the closet door on my new nightmare. I stepped out into the hall and took a deep breath of air. I could taste the rot on my tongue, and I couldn't help but gag. Who the heck lines up eyeballs in their closet like that? Chris mumbled. I tried to tell you she needed help, I said. She doesn't need help, Ben. She needs a freaking exorcist, he said. You coming or what? I can't stand the smell any. His words died in his throat, and his eyes grew wide with fear. I didn't ask him why. I could feel it. Someone was watching me, and I didn't think it was the eyes in the closet. I turned around, my eyes slowly scanning the bedroom. Christ, I whispered, as I finally saw what we'd missed. Under the bed, curled on her side, watching us with the excitement of a kid on Christmas morning, was my wife. She held her hands together just under her chin, and they were shaking eagerly. Now that she knew she'd been found, I could hear the quiet noises she was making. A sort of hiccuping sound in her throat, as if the excitement was just too much for her. It was unnerving to say the least. Wide eyes and that same huge smile. Everything in me told me to run, but I forced it away. This was my wife. No matter how twisted, she was still the woman I married. I had to help her. Lynn, I said softly. She didn't respond, but her head bobbed back and forth in 2 quick little movements as if she were nodding. Baby, I just want to help, okay? Can you let me do that? I asked. I had taken a single step forward, approaching her like some kind of dangerous animal. I love you, Lynn, I said softly, taking another step closer. She let a tiny moan escape her wide-open mouth, and I had to resist the urge to run. Her shoulders were starting to quiver, and her eyes grew as large as saucers. I crouched down so I could see her better and immediately saw the blood. Her hands were covered in it. They trembled more the closer I got, as if she was barely able to contain herself. Lynn, are you hurt? You're bleeding, I said. She bobbed her head again, her bloody fingers moving up and down as if playing an invisible piano. They occasionally grazed her chin, leaving smears of blood on her skin. I wanted to recoil in disgust. The smell that was coming off of her was revolting. I could feel the vomit trying to climb up my throat. Her lips were dry and stretched thin, blood seeping between the cracks. I knew she wouldn't come out on her own, but I didn't want to leave her in the state she was in. I scooted closer and reached out to her. The excited hiccuping sounds got louder and her hands shook, fingers flexing. It was then that I could see the blood oozing from in between her fingers. Oh my God, Lynn, you're bleeding, I said. Instinctively, I reached out to take her hand, but before I could even touch her, her hand sprang out towards me. A sharp pain shot through my arm and I fell back on my ass. My arm burned and I could see the blood dripping down onto the carpet. I looked back at her in shock and saw her grinning madly, her fingers clutching a large shard of glass. You all right in there? Chris asked from behind me. I turned my head slightly and nodded to him, cradling my arm to my chest. When I turned back to face Lynn, I saw that her focus had shifted. She wasn't looking at me anymore, and she wasn't smiling anymore either. She was staring past me, her eyes glaring at Chris the way a hungry lion might stare at an antelope. Her mouth was still hanging open, but it was twisted into a snarl. I got to my feet and began walking backwards down the hall, afraid to take my eyes off her. Are you bleeding? Chris asked. The moment the words left his mouth, Lynn started fast scooting out from under the bed, the glass shard still in her fist. Chris, run, go, I yelled. He must have been too afraid to move because a second later, I felt my back bump into him. He was still standing at the top of the stairs, staring at the horror that was my wife. Lynn had crawled completely out from under the bed and stood in the bedroom doorway, her face twisted in rage. Her whole body was visibly tense. Blood ran down her fingers and onto the floor. Jesus, Lynn, Chris said, you, playing hide and seek? I reached back and pushed him towards the steps. Move your ass, Chris, I said as quietly but firmly as I could. Lynn bobbed her head in fast, sharp motions and began to grin, stretching her mouth open wider and wider so that her chin seemed to touch her chest. I heard Chris mutter a prayer and then he was running down the stairs. I stood at the top of the steps, stuck between the love for a woman who clearly needed serious help and self-preservation. I only want to help, I said, choking back tears. Her eyes focused on me once again, as she slowly lifted the glass, holding it out in front of her. And then she started sprinting towards me, grinning with utter excitement. Thankfully, my body took over and I flew down the stairs, skipping 2 or 3 at a time. I made it to the front door before I felt her leap onto my back, wrapping her arms around my neck, her open mouth next to my ear so that I could hear those terrible hiccuping sounds up close. I shook her off me, knocking her to the floor. I felt a searing pain in my back as she went, but I tore open the front door and bolted to my car. Chris was standing in the front yard talking on the phone with the police. I didn't say a word, I just ran to my car and jumped in. Chris took the hint and followed me, still on the line with 911. I watched the rearview mirror, sure I'd see her there, running after us. But I never did. I went straight to the ER and got 11 stitches in my arm and 3 on my back. The police asked a lot of questions and went back to the house to do a search, but of course, Lynn wasn't there. They advised me to stay with a friend or relative for a while and to file a restraining order as soon as I could, but none of those things would matter. Somehow I just knew. I dropped Chris off at home and went to a motel an hour away. I wanted to put as much distance between me and Lynn as I could. This is where I've been for the last 4 hours. I thought maybe the police would find her, maybe they'd get her the help she desperately needs. But now I don't think so. Because 40 minutes ago, I got a text from an unknown number. Just 3 words. I found you. And a picture attached. The picture was dark and grainy, but I instantly knew what it was. There was no mistaking my wife's eye. I started typing this out immediately after. I don't know what to do. I'm alone and scared, and I can't help but feel that I'm being watched. The reason why I locked the door during a storm. The summer storm seemed harmless at first. It struck on a hot August night, not unlike tonight. Pretty little alerts buzzed happily on every cell phone inside the safety and sanctity of my living room. My wife Emily was the first one to read the emergency message aloud to the group. Flash flood warning in this area, she announced, with misplaced sing-song optimism. Oh, I love watching a good storm. No sooner than she spoke, the evening sky erupted with forks of angry yellow lightning and buckets of cascading rain. 4 of us eagerly crowded around the bay window to watch. That night, we were entertaining guests at our house in the New Jersey suburbs. Emily's best friend, Diana, was visiting from the city. Unfortunately for me, that meant her annoying and arrogant boyfriend was along for the ride. Aaron was awful. I hoped the storm would save me from another one of his self-righteous sermons. I was wrong. Geez, this rain is biblical, I started, shaming myself for the bait. Noah's Ark withstood many times this rain, Aaron finished. Isn't that a fun fact? The Lord always provides. It was thankfully hard to hear his nasally voice. The gutters on our middle-class home, an admitted fixer-upper, were filling in seconds. That was about 8th on the long list of things to fix. I cursed myself again for the embarrassment that would surely follow. Well, I believe in morality. That should count for everybody, Emily countered with sass. I believe the basement might flood with this much rain, I muttered to no one in particular. Oh, gorgeous, Aaron said sarcastically. Might want to have a guy look at that, bud. That's dangerous if you plan on having kids in here. He continued on about having a guy for every homeowner situation, which was really just his wealthy father. I motioned for Em to follow me. She met me worriedly in the kitchen. After taking 2 steps down, it was apparent that I was right about the rain. On the outside of the house, the stairs leading to the basement door are underground. In extreme circumstances, that outdoor stairwell can flood if there is too much water in a short period of time. If it floods, an avalanche of water will pour into the basement as a means to evacuate the now filled basin of steps on the outside. In case that is hard to visualize, I took a video when this started. Here it is. The end result was that our floors were filthy and covered in inches of water. I mumbled a couple quick curses shortly after this video was taken and asked Em to help me unplug the electrical equipment. In a panic, I turned off the circuit to the entire floor. The lights cut accordingly. We were left in darkness and silence. Suddenly, the only sounds were Aaron's muted voice and the angry pattering of rain. And then, Emily screamed. I sloshed across the cold water and reached out into the inky blackness for her. After a chest-tightening couple of seconds, I wrapped my arms around Em's shaking cold frame, and thank God that she was all right. Call that an overreaction at this stage, but my nerves were already shot and I thought she got shocked. What happened? Are you okay? I asked. Em gasped and caught her breath. Something swam by me. If the prospect of dealing with an insurance provider had not freaked me out already, that did. Panic built up inside my throat like a lump. We need to shovel the water out of the staircase. The drain must be clogged. I started to look for my boots, but they must have floated into the office. I'll be right back. Maybe Aaron will help me. No, Emily shouted suddenly. She gripped my arm so hard that there were red impressions from her fingernails. Don't go outside. It's dangerous. She was right, as always. The wind alone was sure to take down a few trees, not to mention the lightning passing through like a constant, convulsing current. Either of those things made going outside pure stupidity. The emergency alert warned people to stay indoors. I nodded and followed her out. We headed back up to the kitchen like depressed, waterlogged squeak toys. Diana was the first to greet us at the top. Look at the two of yous. Did you pop a pipe? I ignored her. So did Emily. We were angry enough, and tolerance for their nonsense had reached an all-time low. Soon enough, Aaron rounded the corner and let out an open guffaw at our drenched clothes and hair. How's the weather down there, guys, huh? Right? I think I mumbled something about his stupid freaking golf cap. I regret that, especially now. Emily gasped behind me, but I didn't care at the time. He was a jerk, and he deserved it. I escaped the kitchen into the sanctity of my bedroom in search of some dry clothes. Our German shepherd, Lola, was locked in there by herself. Aaron did not like dogs, of course. The pup seemed to be taking the tough treatment well enough. She had been quiet all night. But now that I was in there, I could see her head was stuffed under the bed. I reached out to pet her head and was greeted with a nasty snarl in return. Emily's voice echoed through the hallways and pulled me away from the dog before I could give her any concern. Oh my God, Matt, it's hailing. Either the devil was dancing on our rooftop or she was right, again. I looked outside and saw fist-sized balls of ice punch their way into the pavement of my already chipped driveway. I cursed myself, this time for leaving the car outside. I closed the bedroom behind me and joined the group back in the kitchen. Diana seemed to be following the same line of thought. Emily, the Jag is out there. That stupid car costs more than this house. Can we use your garage? She asked. Well, I guess our cars aren't in there. She shot me a knowing glance. Pass. But don't go outside, Di. It's really unsafe. It's just a little ice water in August, she snorted. Hey, maybe those idiot scientists are right, huh? Pastor Pete says not to trust it, though. Just another hoax. She pulled open the deck door before we could protest her anymore. This is bonkers. Guys, it's freezing. You feel this? Are we still in Jersey? I did. The air was so cold that it wafted its way through the kitchen. Subconsciously, the three of us backed away from the open door just as the balls of hail in the sky shifted to pristine snowflakes. Diana, get inside, now, Aaron started. I'll be right back, hun. Stop, she countered from the doorway. Diana, you stupid freaking idiot, get in this house right now, Aaron said sternly. How holy. Of course, that made Di more mad. She slammed the door and disappeared into the growing fog. And then it was quiet. We waited for her in silence. At first, it felt like only a minute. Emily was pacing back and forth while I surveyed damage to the rest of the house. A few trees seemed to have fallen in the backyard. The snow was accumulating at a record pace. In what seemed like only a couple minutes, there was already a half-foot of it on the ground. The wind whipped it back and forth to create drifts of a foot or deeper. I was watching it from the bathroom when Aaron called out for our attention. I never heard a car start. The three of us converged again by the deck door. The backyard was a backdrop of white. It was impossible to see the driveway. Did either of you hear a car? We have to go find her, Aaron continued in a growing frenzy. We cannot go out there, Emily said in a mouse-like tone. Just wait another minute. Aaron looked from me to my wife. I shrugged in his direction. To hell with you both. You belong there with your morality garbage. Open the door. Aaron pushed Em out of the way in his haste. Before he got halfway there, I grabbed him by the collar and threw him out the door myself. Then I slammed it shut. The house was then quiet again. We were left with Aaron's golf cap thrown back inside with the wind. I was just about to remark about what a jerk he was when suddenly an enormous roar punctured through the storm. Emily and I darted to the deck window to check it out. At first, there was nothing to see. Waves of snow sheets encompassed every corner and tree branch on our property. Visibility was low. But then, in the corner of the yard, a flash of red jacket alerted my eyes to a shape moving quickly by the driveway. It was Aaron. He was trying to run across the snow, but he wasn't getting far. He kept looking behind him, at something just outside my line of sight. After a few feet, he seemed to give up altogether and fall helplessly to the ground. Then the thing behind him came into focus. Oh God, oh my God, oh my God, Matt, look at it, look at it, look at it, look at it, look at it. What the heck is that? The snow blocked most of my view, but some facts were easily discernible. In comparison to Aaron, the creature stood at least 3 feet taller. Its back was hunched and its skin was covered in a matted, dark-colored hair. It followed our former friend lazily. There was no haste to its movement. When it caught him, it lifted him up in the air like a chew toy. The sickening crunch was more than enough for me to grab Emily and hold her eyes up against my shoulder. Neither of us needed to see any more. My first instinct was to lock the doors. Lola was barking, and that would draw attention. I knew whatever was outside would soon set its sights on the house. I grabbed Em's hand and ran to lock each lock. For once, I thanked myself for spending money on security that summer. When that was done, we huddled in the bedroom with the dog and waited it out. It was quiet again. I know, given the absolute mess that we just witnessed outside our own house, you would think it would be panic. But Lola now knew to be silent. She took to her spot under the bed. Emily whimpered, but her voice was muffled under the covers. I watched the window. The snow was not stopping. After only an hour or so, more than a foot had piled up. There is always a stillness in nature when such a storm occurs. But there was something too still. Sure enough, moments later, the loud crunch of footsteps outside confirmed my theory. "Open the door," echoed a familiar and haunting voice from somewhere in the distance. "You two idiots, open the door." Emily and Lola both cried by my side. I felt helpless. Something started to tap at the walls of the house. It ran back and forth and tapped each door and window it could find, like it was searching for weaknesses. The noise sounded like long nails clicking against the wood frames. Seemingly frustrated, the voice called out again, this time with a horrible parody of Diana's obnoxious Brooklyn accent. "Look at the two of yous, just another hoax." The curious scratching focused on the front door. Then it turned into a vicious pounding. "This is bonkers," it screeched with a horrible, throaty laugh. It coughed. The voice was horribly disjointed as it switched between Diana and Aaron's two very different tones. "Open the door. The Lord always provides. Open the door. The Lord always provides. Open the door, please, Matt. Open the door, please, Emily. Open the door, open the door, open the door, open the door." Emily screamed alongside it in a hysterical, horribly wounded, yet still battle-ready tone of her own. Go to hell. Then she did something I had never seen her do in 5 years of marriage. She got down to one knee and prayed. The prayer was not to anyone in particular. Em was never that religious. I could not even hear much of what she was saying through the horrible banging outside. But somehow she looked at peace. She thanked someone, anyone, for our life. She thanked them for our house and for our memories inside. For all the warm times and holidays spent around the fireside with seasons of Netflix and cases of bottled wine. She thanked them, all of them, any and all gods that might be present on earth on that hellish evening. And when she finished, she offered them one final line. "If someone is watching what is happening to us," she started to sob desperately among the scrapes, "please help." Something answered. The pounding receded, weakly at first. Then the great footsteps that arrived exited the same way they came. After another agonizingly silent hour, the snow started to taper and disappear altogether. Moonlight crept into the windows as the clouds receded, and snow melted swiftly in the rising sun. When the morning came, the weather finally died down. Our friends were reported missing. They have not been found. Tonight is the 1-year anniversary of their disappearance. There is a warning for another severe storm. We will not be opening the door. My dog was lost for 3 days. What came back wasn't my dog. As a kid, I was raised in a small fishing community on the eastern side of Canada, surrounded by the Gulf of St. Lawrence and the boreal forest. The entirety of the land was close to 4,000 square feet, with an even smaller number of residents sprawled out over Main Street, the main road running straight through our little town, and farmhouses spread widely between areas of trees that were changed to domestic residential homes when agriculture stopped being profitable. In total, our community is surrounded by a vast expanse of ocean and a seemingly endless barrage of trees that spread over 55% of Canada's entire country. I spent most of my life hunting in those woods, so you can imagine my joy when my parents got me a hunting dog. Sandy was a Shetland sheepdog, and while they were more fit to be herding and tracking sheep over grassy plains rather than rabbits and deer through dense forest, it didn't stop me from taking him with me on every excursion I possibly could. Sandy had been by my side for enough hunting trips that he'd grown accustomed to waking up just before breaking daylight, and on a few occasions helped track down small game like squirrels and rabbits through considerably large areas of forest. Sandy wasn't my property and wasn't treated like he belonged to me. Sandy was a member of the family, my best companion, and my truest friend. I think fondly back on all the times he'd sit in the front seat of the truck without being told, ready to go for a walk in whatever part of the forest I took him to. I can honestly say that there will never be a dog that will fill the void Sandy left in my life. I find that dog lovers relate to that sentiment more than others. It was October 30th, the first day of deer hunting season. I had been talking with my family about taking Sandy, my hunting gear, and some essentials to one of the cabins my grandfather owned in his heyday off an unmarked road a few hundred miles into the wilderness for a few days. This was met with a lot of protesting, but nothing could stop me from getting in some time looking for wild game in an area that wasn't already picked clean by illegal hunters earlier on in the month. Everything was packed into the old blue Ford, Sandy included, and a few hours of driving later we were setting up camp in one of my grandfather's secluded old cabins. Here's where things got messed up. Sandy, I'm so sorry. I had spent most of my life in the wilderness. There were only a handful of times that things had gotten weird for me, but usually everything can be explained with scientific reason. That's why I brushed off Sandy's weirdness on the first few nights, chalking it up to the nervousness of a dog that's capable of hearing the far-off noises of various coyotes, wolves, bears, and moose. This was untouched territory, of course. There had been plenty of time for wildlife to set up camp here, too. The first night was fairly normal. I had set up Sandy's bed in the corner of the living room, next to the television that looked like it came out of the early 90s. I figured I'd give Sandy the option to have someplace to lay down for a while, despite the fact that he slept curled up with me 9 times out of 10. Close to 10 at night, Sandy looked straight at the wooden door and whined. I figured he needed to relieve himself and opened the door to let him out, not worried about having my best friend stray too far from me. Instead, he sat just inside the door, looking out at the forest's edge beyond the path. I too stood and looked for a few minutes before deciding he had just heard an errant critter close to the cabin. The rest of the night was fairly normal, and Sandy slept with me fine. The second night, I chalked the weirdness up to Sandy's stress. Earlier in the day, we had been walking a few miles through the woods beyond the house, and I thought I heard the sound of twigs cracking under something heavy. I hoped it wasn't a moose, because my shotgun wouldn't have stood a chance, but something changed in Sandy that I didn't pay close attention to at the time. He hunched himself on his hind legs, his front pressed close to the ground, his mouth pulled up over his teeth, and he growled towards nothingness. I figured we'd try hunting again later, if whatever it was had left and should he be feeling up to it, but once we were inside, he didn't want to move. Even when I tried to get him to go outside and do his business, he sat at the door and cried, wailing at me to let me know he didn't want to go out there. I didn't pressure him. If he messed on the floor, so be it. Sandy never acted up before. I could excuse an accident or two if he really didn't want to be out there. It must have been a bear, I thought, before locking the door and calling it a night. The third night is where things went to hell, and I still don't fully understand what happened. Sandy didn't eat all day. I managed to shoot a rabbit in the early morning when Sandy decided he didn't want to be outside any longer than he had to and retired inside for the day. I cooked it up, threw a little gravy on it, and gave it to my dog. I didn't do this all the time, but I figured now was a special occasion and maybe a treat would put him in a better mood for another walk the next day. Sandy didn't touch it. He didn't so much as sniff it. Instead, he sat at my side on the couch, watching the doorway intently. I tucked him under one of my arms, and he laid his head on my lap, eyes still locked on that door. Close to 3 hours of watching grainy VHS tapes on an outdated television set, Sandy started crying, hugging himself close to my body. This is where my judgment took me down the wrong path for the first time of many. It must sound silly being my dog's protector, rather than my dog being mine, but this was my family. I figured if there was something out there that was scaring Sandy so bad, then it was my job to do something about it. I loaded my 410, opened the door, stood in the doorway, and waited. I must have waited at least a half hour, staring into nothing. There was barely any sound save for the faint buzz of insects and leaves rustling in the cold autumn wind. Moose aren't elegant creatures, and if it were a moose, I would have heard it coming. Around the 40-minute mark, Sandy took off like a shot into the darkness of the trees beyond the path, barking wildly. I started to get worried, despite my knowledge that my dog isn't entirely helpless in the wilderness. There were still bigger animals that would have liked to take a bite out of him if there wasn't a lot of food for the winter. I heard Sandy's bark fade away in the distance, and then stop altogether. I waited hours standing in the doorway with my shotgun cocked and ready to put down whatever it was that was waiting in the woods. I waited hours for Sandy to come back to the house. I waited until the sun was cracking through the trees, and then I waited until that night, sitting on my porch step, fending off sleep deprivation to see my dog come back. Sandy did come back, but not for another 3 days. Fog had rolled in at that point, and it was getting darker, the night painting the sky a navy blue. Tracking over the last few days proved futile, and I started to get worried that I'd need to leave and find more provisions to last me the next few nights. I couldn't leave Sandy up there, lost in the woods, cold and probably hungry. The thought that he might be waiting out there for me to find him and bring him back home was distressing enough. I was packing the bag that hung on the coat rack next to the door with what I'd need for the next day's trip. I figured tomorrow would be the last day before I'd go into town and see if my father would help me find Sandy. He was a retired, graying man, but I was sure if I brought up Sandy's name, he'd be more than willing to help me search for him. Thankfully, Sandy came back before I'd even finished that train of thought. I saw him from the window, on the path that led down to the main road, a few dozen feet away from the house. Normally, I'd hear him scamper to the doorway and paw at the door a few times, eager to come in, but this was different. I could see the reflection of his eyes as green pearls in the murky fog that had swamped the house. For a moment, I thought it might be an animal, but the outline of his body and the wisps of thick, low-lying clouds was unmistakable. Still, despite myself, I hesitated. There was something different about his body language. I stared out the window for a few more moments before reason overcame my gut instinct. Sandy could be hurt, I thought, or worse. I flung the doorway open, but he didn't come right away. Instead, he stood there, watching me intently, and when he didn't move, I whistled to him. "Here, Sandy," I coaxed him towards the house. "Here, boy." The way he moved was different. It was as though his hips had been dislocated, and the angle of his paws changed direction with every step, as though he'd forgotten how to walk properly. His head was bowed to the ground, but his teeth weren't bared. He didn't seem aggressive. The only way I could describe the look he gave me was sheepish, like he'd just gotten into something he wasn't supposed to, and I yelled at him for it. I thought he might hurt himself hopping up onto the elevated step if he dislocated his hips, but he did just fine. His back half swung a little, oddly enough, and his paws almost folded underneath himself, but he didn't go sprawling. He sat on the step and didn't take his eyes off me. It wasn't until I had moved from the doorway completely, opened the door wide, and waited for him to walk in that he moved. Straight to his bed. He didn't stop at my hand and sniff at me. He didn't wait for pets or jump up on me like he used to. It was straight to his bed, where he sat and watched me for quite some time afterwards. I returned to the movie at hand. I called to him a few times, but he didn't respond. His ears didn't so much as raise to the sound of my voice, or the pat of my hand on the worn-out couch beside me. I had missed my buddy, but I wasn't about to move him physically towards me. There was something about him that said I shouldn't have let him in, but I chalked it up to silliness, and a few hours later I went to bed. The more I think back on it, I don't recall him blinking once. He sat there like a statue, and when I turned off the light, I could still see the reflection of jade green following me as I went into my room and shut the door. I could have sworn I heard him walk in the night, the sound of nails clicking against the wooden floor coming up to the door of my room. but they were slow and deliberate. They weren't like the quickness of Sandy realizing I'd gone to bed and coming to curl up. I heard the noises stop outside of my bedroom, but I didn't hear his whine. I thought nothing of it and fell into a deep sleep. When I woke in the morning, I figured it must have been a dream. Sandy was still sitting in the upright position I left him in when I went to bed. It was as though he didn't move a muscle the entire night, and when I said good morning, he didn't so much as wag his tail. He did follow me into the kitchen, but he paused at the doorway when I put his bowl down on the floor and filled it up with supermarket dog food. Once again, his back half moved weirdly as he slowly made his way towards me. There was a nagging feeling that something was off-putting about the way he looked that day. It was like he had gotten a little longer overnight. Sandy hunched down again, like when he was walking to the door the night before. He didn't come into the kitchen. I figured he must have been hungry being out in the wild for so long, but he eyed me like he was waiting for me to come a little closer, rather than touch the food. It goes without saying, but after a few moments of a staring contest between me and my unblinking dog, I called off that foolishness and called his name out loudly, not even a flinch. I didn't want to move closer to my dog to leave the kitchen door, but this was my Sandy, and the most damage he'd ever done was eat flies. Sure enough, as I passed him, he turned and his body swayed unnaturally, but he didn't move towards me. When I left that day, I couldn't find anything. The deer tracks in the mud were made a few days prior and went cold off naturally made trails through the woods. I couldn't hear bugs or birds or even the howl of a nearby coyote. The only sounds for miles away from the campsite were my own breathing and the sound of crunching leaves underneath my feet. When the sun started to set, I started making my way back, but I should have just packed my stuff and left. Just behind a cluster of trees, with the house just visible beyond the rise, I figured I found out the reason why the animals had abandoned this place. Generally, when there are mass animal deaths, that usually means that something is wrong in the area of the slaughter, and wildlife are usually smart enough to get the hell out of Dodge. Even cats are bred instinctively not to like drinking from water that is close to where their food is, because if you saw a dead animal close to a stream, you'd figure the stream was tainted and find another source of water. Hundreds of squirrels were disemboweled and strewn across the grass in an almost perfect circle. Most of them were skinned alive, but when I turned to throw up the contents of my stomach, there were a few dozen that were inside out. I couldn't help but vomit repeatedly as I tried my best to walk around the circle of tiny organs and mashed up bodies, not just over the site, but because the smell was ungodly. I don't know how long they'd been out there, but if I'd stumbled across this sooner, I'd have left with Sandy in tow immediately after. Gradually, the bodies stopped and delved off into a random dead squirrel here and there. The biggest thing I managed to find, just a few feet off the unholy feeding ground, was a deer. It looked as though something had decided to skin it alive from hide to neck and draped some of the skin over a branch like someone was tanning the hide. I don't know how long it had been there, but it smelled like it had been dead for quite some time, despite the fact that there wasn't a single freaking fly. The head had been cut off clean just above the shoulders, and when I realized the organs had been removed, I moved from a walking pace through the forest to a jog. Thankfully, the cabin wasn't too far off. I threw up one final time, wiped my mouth off on the back of my sleeve, and looked up to the house to see Sandy watching me from the window. I tried to reason with myself and tell myself Sandy's odd behavior could have been trauma. I know it's stupid to think of it now, but at the time it was the only reasonable explanation I had to keep myself from going insane. The elongating body could have just been the loneliness getting to me. Sandy had realized there was something up with this place, and the second he noticed it, I should have taken this warning and taken off back into town. Once the door was shut behind me, I started packing the food and essentials back into boxes, moving quickly to try and get my things into the truck before night came. It'd be dangerous to try and maneuver my way through the trails at night, as the hills off Kelly's Mountain were steep, and in pitch darkness, with my only companion being my headlights, it would have been easy to slide off a ravine and never be heard from again. I didn't want to stay one more night, but I had no choice. I had gotten back to the house just moments before the sun finally receded past the horizon, and we were bathed in a navy blue sky once again. I didn't pay attention to Sandy. He just sat at his bed and watched me pack. I figured no harm, no foul. I'd throw his stuff in the truck in the morning, and we'd be back in town before night the next day. Glancing at him for just a moment, it was a passing thought that he was looking a little longer today, and when I went to bed, it was a hard time getting to sleep for the next few hours. It must have been close to 4 or 5 in the morning when I heard it. The sound of whistling. The same whistle I used to call my dog. I broke out into a cold sweat when I realized that whoever slaughtered those squirrels, hung the skin up, and left what he didn't need could have very well broken into my house. The door to my room didn't make a sound as I opened it slowly, thankfully. I waited a moment, listening to someone call my dog for a few more seconds before I dared poke my head out from the doorframe to get a good look at whoever it was that could have hurt Sandy. The outside door was open. All I saw was the back half of Sandy, too long and lanky, almost coiled around the back of the door. His front half was outside. Whatever it was that had impersonated my dog, it was whistling slowly, calling for Sandy. When I could have sworn that it had hunched down to the ground again and said, "Sandy," in the most ungodly voice I'd ever freaking heard, I closed the door just as softly as I had opened it. I don't know how long I waited with my back pressed up against the door. I knew I left my gun in the bag on the coat rack. I know I didn't sleep. I waited until I saw the sun break over the horizon, and then I waited some more, until it must have been midday, and I finally got the courage to open the door again and make a break for the truck. I wouldn't die in that place. Sandy was gone, and the door was open. His food was untouched, but the fridge was open, and all the meat was gone. I didn't bother packing his stuff. I just threw my bag over my shoulder, made my way to the Ford as fast as I could, and turned on the ignition. I can't describe the feeling that overcame me as I realized that I'd have to leave Sandy in this place. The thought that he could be dead was never a thought in my mind. I don't think I could cope with the knowledge that whatever I allowed in my house, whatever disemboweled those animals, could have done the same with him. I made my way down the winding paths and roads as fast as I possibly could without veering off the cliffs. I felt like I was turning in circles down this labyrinth that would take me back to that house. But when I reached the pavement on the stretch of road back to town, I felt relief wash over me, thinking I was safe. Just as I was pulling off onto the pavement, I felt something hard hit the back windshield, sending broken glass into the passenger seat. I only got a glimpse of the deer's decapitated head catching on unbroken glass and tumbling into the back seat. I cried for most of the way home, hands clenching the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. I wish I could leave this off on a positive note. I wish I could tell you that I found Sandy at home waiting for me. I wish I could tell you that was the end of it, a traumatizing experience in the woods that I'll get over with time. Last night, I found it hard to sleep. I kept replaying the entirety of my trip to Kelly's Mountain in my head. I figured I wouldn't be sleeping for a while and laid there, listening to the wind through my open window. I could have sworn I heard the whistle I used to call my dog with, coming from the forest's edge. If you go on trips with your dog, I advise that you don't let them out of your sight for too long. What comes back might not be your dog. I used to work night security at a zoo. "Damned dirty apes," Ronnie cursed into the radio. "What's going on out there?" I asked, giving his quote a chuckle. I could hear the shrieking of the baboons in the background. The storm came down worse than the pretty weather girl said on the television earlier that night. In fact, it was the complete opposite. The wind gusts blew through the zoo accompanied by torrents of cold, thick rain. She said it was supposed to become a drizzle in the next couple of hours, yet it was intensifying. "They're really agitated tonight. I don't know what the heck is wrong with them," Ronnie answered back. "Must be the storm. It's probably going to get worse before it gets better. Animals have a sixth sense about them, you know? They know when the crap is about to hit the fan," I said back to him and lowered the radio volume. "Oh, come on. You know that's some pseudo-science nonsense," Ronnie shouted as I expected he would. It was easy getting under his skin when it came to stuff like that. He had no tolerance for nonsense, and that's part of the reason why we got along so well. We had plenty of time to get to know each other while working the day shift and often walked around the zoo shooting the breeze while telling the visitors not to feed the animals, and occasionally dealing with an obnoxious or drunken patron. Everything changed the day after the first incident at the zoo. Several animals were found eviscerated in their enclosures, and some were missing altogether. Security was ramped up in response, forcing us to man the night shift until the police could figure out what had happened. Neither of us minded being reassigned since our pay was slightly increased, and we wouldn't be dealing with the nasty heat in the daytime. Best of all, there weren't any visitors in the zoo. "I'm kidding, buddy," Relax, I said, adding fuel to the fire. Screw you, Al, Ronnie shouted and cut out. I walked underneath the awning near a row of snack stands, staying out of the rain. I felt bad for Ronnie since there was nothing on his side of the zoo besides restrooms that would offer shelter from the rain. Hey Ron, why don't you hide out in the bathroom for a while until this crap blows over? Give them a good cleaning while you're at it, I suggested. Shut up, Ronnie replied in a whisper. Oh, come on, I'm just trying to help, I replied back, laughing that I'd gotten under his skin again. No, seriously, be quiet a second, Ronnie commanded in a serious tone. In the time we'd worked together, I'd never heard Ronnie be serious about anything. I waited for what felt like hours for him to radio back. I was about to squeeze the call button when the crackle of radio static startled me. Get the heck over here right now, Ronnie shouted frantically. What is it? I answered back. Seriously, man, whatever you're doing, just drop it and get over here right now. You gotta see this. Ronnie's voice wavered in the static of the radio. Though I was cold and soaked to the skin, I felt colder still when I heard him speak those last words. I'd never heard his voice waver like that. I'd never heard that undercurrent in it that couldn't be disguised. Fear. Be over there as soon as possible. Sit tight. The radio crackled and I headed from the shelter of the snack stands back to the parked golf cart. The plastic roof of the vehicle did little to shelter the console from the pouring rain. Everything was soaked and dripping. I hopped in and turned the key, my hand shaking from the cold. I buzzed away in the silent vehicle along the black pavement of the zoo paths toward the primate enclosures where Ronnie awaited. The grounds were empty and quiet. Much too quiet. Why in God's name did we have to work on a night like tonight? Why couldn't we just stay in the office until this crap blew over? And now this nonsense with the apes. The thoughts buzzed in my head, and more I began to weigh how much I actually needed this job. When I arrived at the baboon enclosure, Ronnie stood by the edge of the cage, his plastic poncho flapping in the wind behind him like some kind of comic book superhero. I slammed the brakes hard and brought it to a dead stop behind him, but he didn't turn around. The shrieking of the primates was frenzied, high-pitched, and perpetual, and set my teeth on edge. They couldn't have been too happy about being stuck out in this god-awful weather, but I got the feeling from what my partner had said it was something more than that. I hopped from the seat of the cart, and lightning flashed in the sky, followed by a boom of thunder, low, loud, and close. The baboons' shrieking intensified, and I felt like I was walking into that scene from 2001. I expected to see a giant black obelisk rising from the center of their cage. I came up beside my coworker. Ronnie, what the hell's going on, man? What's got into them? He still didn't turn his head. The pouring rain ran down his cheeks as he stared into the center of the cage. I followed his gaze and saw a swarm of the shrieking monkeys encircling something. They were feeding, tearing pieces of flesh and blood and ligament from an animal torso lying between them. Ronnie just kept staring, his 1,000-yard stare. It's human, he said slowly. There's a human body in there. I felt ill as I glanced around the top of the enclosure. I figured that whoever's body was being torn asunder by a frenzied troop of baboons had gotten in from up there. There was an altogether too short railing at the top that opened up into the main level of the park. During the day, people could come and watch the baboons play from above instead of below. A few times in the past, there had been a few idiots who decided that they wanted to climb the railing to play with the baboons. There was only one time someone had successfully made it into the enclosure, but the guards were able to rescue them before the baboons got to them. This person hadn't been so lucky. What the hell are we going to do? Ronnie said blankly, staring at a rather large baboon leisurely chewing on a handful of flesh. I stood unblinking and uncertain of the best course of action. Obviously, we couldn't go in. Getting between a wild animal and its meal is inadvisable, and really, there was no point. The person in there was deader than disco. Risking our lives for a corpse wasn't a reasonable course of action, especially because we didn't get paid enough for that. We better call the boss, I said, turning toward the exit of the exhibit. I think we should just call the cops right away, Ronnie said to me as we made our way back to the small office where our phones were protected from the rain. The boss had told us clearly after the first couple of incidents that we should contact him first. He'd take care of it. Something about us not getting paid enough to deal with this crap. He was right. Reminding Ronnie of this, he didn't seem pleased. He started quietly grumbling under his breath, spitting the rainwater from his mouth with every movement of his lips. Grabbing my phone, I sifted through to find George. After several rings, his wife answered the phone. Her quiet hello sounded groggy from being awoken. "Hi, Mrs. S. Is George around? There's been another incident." My voice cracked. "It's pretty serious." She yawned. "Hi, Al. George said he was going into work tonight. Something about a problem with the security system. You haven't seen him?" Placing my hand over the receiver so she couldn't hear me, I spun around to Ronnie, who was looking a little pale. "You seen George tonight?" He simply shook his head. "We haven't. I'll keep an eye out." She yawned again. "All right, dear. You two be careful in that storm." The only option now was to notify the cops. I didn't like it, but damned if we were going to go searching for George in the storm. Ronnie seemed relieved, more color flooding to his face. "I'll call them," he said. "All right, I don't want to, but I'll head back to the enclosure to make sure everything is secure," I said as Ronnie started dialing. The office was close by and I could still hear the monkeys shrieking. I made my way to the top of the enclosure to double-check the locks on the doors. Realizing they were secure, I sighed and put my weight on the rail, tilting my head to the left in an attempt to not look down. My focus fixated on one of the trees, and that's when I noticed the piece of clothing that had been left behind. A few years back, George had gone on a trip with his wife. He came back with a red cap which seemed to be superglued to his head ever since. My stomach dropped and I sprinted back to the office. Flinging open the door, I yelled out to Ronnie, "I think it was George." "Crap, Ron, his hat was in the enclosure." Ronnie froze with his thumb hovering over the call button, staring into the space I occupied. He blinked. "No freaking way." I sighed. "Yeah, way. I can hardly believe it myself." No freaking way. George never went near those things. You know, those damn dirty apes. He hates them. His hat was hooked on one of the branches with smears of brown and deep red. Apart from that, there was no way to identify the mess of viscera lying in the bottom of the enclosure now. "His hat was in there, Ron." He shook his head with a little too much conviction. "That don't mean a thing. Could have fallen off. Then maybe the wind blew it in there." Ron hit call and put the phone to his ear. I slumped in the chair next to him, barely listening to his requests for police and an ambulance. I shut my eyes for just a minute when the sound of the rain became cracks against the window. Hailstones fell and littered the ground with pale, icy beads. By the time Ron explained for the third time that we were on 5th and 8th, not 6th and 7th, the hailstones were as big as golf balls and slammed against the window, threatening to come straight through. The cries from the park changed from excited gibbering to panicked shrieks. The lemurs in the enclosure next to the office ran around trying in vain to hide under the trees. Hailstones crashed down against the bars, exploding into fragments. Some got through the gaps and hit the ground inside like grenades. The unlucky animals took direct hits, some reeling from broken ribs, some slumped to the ground with a bloody mess on their skull. The ones that found hiding places fought for the space, pushing smaller, weaker ones into the fray. Crap, Ron hung up. I could barely hear them on the line. The dispatcher didn't hear a word of what I said. This storm is seriously messing with us. I think we're in here for the night, Ron. As the words came out of my mouth, there was a crash above us. It thudded heavily like it would break through the roof. The office shook with the impact. Then there was another one and another afterward. Ron and I both jumped out of our seats and stared up at the ceiling, expecting it to come crashing down on us at any moment. "Those pieces of hail must be the size of freaking basketballs to make that noise," I said to Ron as we both went to the office door and into the administrative area. As we approached the window for a look outside, there were several more crashes on the roof. Neither of us said a word at what we saw when we looked out the window. Dozens of animal corpses littered the pavement outside the office as far as we could see. We couldn't tell what any of them were. Each corpse was a tangled mess of flesh and viscera, broken bones ripped through skin and fur. They looked just like George's body in the baboon enclosure. Ron put his head down and puked. I was too in shock to do anything else but stare ahead and watch as animals continued to fall from the sky. It's freaking raining all creatures great and small of God's green earth. Ron looked up at me, his face pale, and wiped the vomit from the edge of his mouth with his hand. He stared at me incredulously. The pounding on the roof continued above us, a continual thump, thump, thump. I stared out the window and watched the rain of animal corpses hitting the pavement. Body after body rained from the sky with the hail. Giant, fleshy sacks of muscle and blood and grizzled guts exploding against the hard, wet surface of the zoo asphalt and splattered everywhere. "I'm worried the roof is going to come in," Ronnie said. His eyes were wild. "This is some end times crap we're dealing with right now, man. His proclamations were cut short by a sound coming from outside. It was a viscous, bone-rattling, monstrous squawk that was deeper and louder than any boom of thunder I'd ever had. "What the heck was that?" I said. "We need to get out of here." "No!" Ronnie yelled. "What the heck's got into you, man? It's freaking raining animals outside." I didn't care. I ran for the door and burst out into the cold insanity that was the storm. It was a wasteland of carnage, animal bodies strewn everywhere, and the unrelenting hail and wind pounded me. Then I heard it again, that animal sound, that scream, shaking me to the core and making a chill run up my spine. "Al!" Ronnie yelled from behind and tackled me. We fell to the tarmac, and I looked just in time to see a giant, hulking gorilla drop like a stone and explode into a puddle of gore right where we had been standing. "Holy crap!" I yelled over the thump, thump, thump of bodies hitting the pavement everywhere around us. "Thanks, man." Ronnie was frozen above me, staring up into the sky. "Ronnie?" I followed Ronnie's gaze. At first, I thought he was staring at the storm, then lightning flashed and I saw what he was looking at. It was only for a moment, but whatever I saw was huge, flying on massive wings. Now that I knew it was there, I could see it, turning round and round in the sky. It was circling the mess of meat that had just splattered behind us. I glanced down at myself and realized that Ronnie and I were covered in the gore too. "Ronnie," I choked out, trying to remain calm. "Ronnie, we have to get back inside." Ronnie still had his eyes glued to the sky. He was whimpering prayers to whatever deity he worshipped. "Ronnie, damn it!" I stood up and grabbed his arm and began yanking him towards the building. "We need to get back inside now." I heard the creature getting closer, the wings shaking the air, warning that death was only a few yards away. I could feel the beating of the wings and the shifting of the air. It squawked again, and I dropped Ronnie's arm to cover my ears. I looked at Ronnie again. He'd finally come around and was standing. The squawk seemed to shake him loose from his paralysis. I took that chance to bolt for the door. "Hurry up!" I shouted to Ronnie while he was still making his way back into the building. He slipped on the gore that covered the ground, almost falling over, but regained his balance as he bolted towards the door. A flash of lightning lit up the sky, and then there was the crash of thunder a moment later. Ronnie's eyes widened into pure terror. Another powerful squawk ripped across the air, making my eardrums feel as if they were going to burst. Whatever it was that he saw gave him a second wind, and he quickly made it back inside. I slammed the door shut behind him and twisted the lock into place. The door started to shake a second later, as if a group of people were hitting it with hammers. The sound of wood splintering ran out through the office, and an ear-piercing squawk filled my soul with fear. I had no time to think as the window next to the door shattered and something flew into the administrative room. The impact must have dazed it as it fluttered around on the ground trying to regain its composure. I felt a tug on my arm, and Ronnie dragged me away into the security room. "Did you see that crap?" I shouted, knowing damn well that Ronnie had seen it. There were 1,000,001 questions on my mind. My adrenaline rush wouldn't allow me to formulate the words that I was trying to say. I was hoping he would have some sort of an answer that would put my mind to ease as to what that creature was. "The sky, it's full of them," Ronnie replied through chattering teeth. I couldn't tell if it was from being cold or from fear. "I only saw the huge one and the one in the office," I said back confused. "I saw them all when the lightning flashed. They're circling above us, hundreds of them," Ronnie explained. A cold shiver went up my spine. Ronnie sat down on a chair and put his palms to his face. He wiped away the blood that was getting into his eyes. I did the same, hoping to remove whatever I had on my face as well. "Coco," Ronnie said, as if figuring out the answer to all our questions in life. "What about Coco?" I replied. Dude, that was Coco that splattered in front of us on the pavement, Ronnie answered with wide eyes, nodding his head in a daze. Yeah, there were a lot of animals out there. The whole freaking zoo is splattered outside, I replied, still not understanding where he was going with it. Coco is a 300-pound gorilla, Ronnie said, looking at me like I was an idiot. I really don't know how that fun fact helps us right now, I said, feeling irritated. Whatever the heck it was that dropped him from the sky has to be about the size of a gosh darn bus to have done that, Ronnie shouted at me while tossing the chair to the side and pacing around the room. He opened the desk drawers and ransacked them until he found a can of mace and tossed it at me. So what do we do now? I asked, hoping to calm him down. We barricade the door, hunker down, and hope to God that they don't break through, Ronnie replied while turning over the desk and pushing it against the door. I started to search the room for something else to add to our makeshift barrier and found nothing. We took our chairs and placed them against the door too. We both sat there listening to the thump, thump, thump and muffled squawks between the rumbles of thunder. Al, wake up, Ronnie said, shaking me out of my slumber. I didn't realize that I had fallen asleep. Between the sound of thunder and squawks, I didn't think I'd ever get to sleep, but my exhaustion must have won out at some point in the night. What's going on, Oyas? I asked, wiping the sleep away from my eyes. The whites of Ronnie's eyes were bloodshot, and there were bags under his eyes. He must have stayed awake the entire night. It's morning. The storm is gone. There hasn't been a thump on the roof in hours. I think it's safe, but I don't want a chance going out there without backup, Ronnie explained, pointing at the mace on the floor next to me. We made our way out of the security office, remaining as quiet as we could. Ronnie led in front, holding an improvised spear made from a broom handle we'd found in the closet. I stayed behind him with the mace ready to spray anything that came at us. As soon as we stepped out of the office door, the smell of rotting meat punched us in the face like we owed it money. I tried to hold back from vomiting, but the smell was too wretched. I tossed up whatever I had in my stomach, and then we continued onward with our hands over our noses and made sure to breathe through our mouths. It didn't make it any better. As we exited the hallway and entered the administrative office, we were met with the sound of squawking birds. That almost sent me running back into the security office, but Ronnie held my arm and told me to listen. They were nothing like the squawking we heard the night before. We tiptoed to the shattered window, crunching over the broken glass, alerting the birds to our presence. A few turned their attention to us, then immediately went right back to enjoying their scavenged meal. They paid no mind to us as we took in the grisly view that the darkness of the night had hidden away from our eyes. Thousands of birds from miles around had smelled the stench of festering zoo animals and came to enjoy the buffet of leftovers the creatures from last night left behind. Entire carcasses were left behind that looked like they had been torn apart, but none of the meat was taken. Only the bones seemed to have been removed. Birds of all shapes, colors, and sizes pecked away with blood-smeared beaks at the carrion. Before leaving the safety of the office, we searched the skies for any sign of the creatures from last night. Aside from a few birds circling above, there was nothing threatening. We made our way out to the parking lot carefully to avoid slipping on the gore that coated the ground. Once I got my phone on a charger, I called for the police and told the dispatcher about what happened. I couldn't believe my ears when they told me that they would get to us in an hour or two. The storm had wrought havoc across the state, causing traffic accidents and bringing down power lines, making travel very difficult. All officers on duty were busy. Ronnie took the phone from me and tried to berate some sense into the dispatcher, but apparently, even if every animal on Earth was killed, the police would still be more worried about taking care of human life first. Looking back on it now, I can see their reasoning, but after spending the night in a security office worrying about being lifted into the air and then dropped to my death by some monster, there was no reason left in the world. We waited an hour before an officer showed up at the zoo. As he stepped out his car, he placed his hand over his nose and coughed at the smell in the air. It was beginning to warm up too. The smell would get worse as the day went on. The officer asked us what happened, and we had no choice but to tell him the truth. He didn't believe us until we offered him a tour of our newly renovated zoo. Once he finished puking, he called for backup. I imagine that the rest of the day must have been like that for everyone else that showed up at that horrific scene. It's been almost 12 years since the events of that horrible night. The zoo never reopened, and a month later, it was bulldozed and the land was sold off to a company that built a warehouse there. Ronnie and I heard through the grapevine that the zookeepers and everyone else that worked there were told that it was closed because the owners had a change in morality about keeping animals caged up for human amusement. They were told that the animals were released into the wild or transferred to other zoos around the world. Any further inquiries led nowhere. The company offered very generous severance packages to the employees that lost their jobs. Ronnie and I were offered a substantial amount to compensate us for our troubles that night and to buy our silence. Non-disclosure agreements were a stipulation to getting our payouts and keeping them. Unfortunately, money talks, and it's very loud in the ears of a couple of guys that used to work security in a zoo. Plus, who was going to believe our story anyway? George's wife was the only loose end that the company had to contend with. She filed a missing persons report with the local police, and there was an investigation into his disappearance. The last anyone had seen of him was a security camera video showing him getting a drink at a convenience store and leaving the store never to be seen again. George never turned up. It pained me to have to keep my mouth shut about it, knowing that she was suffering the entire time. Luckily for her, it was discovered later on that George had a life insurance policy through the zoo, and Mrs. S got a pretty huge payout. She soon went silent on the matter as well. A few months after George disappeared, she moved out of town, never to be seen or heard from again. Just to be safe, I changed the names of the people involved and left out many of the specifics in case anyone from the company's legal department happens to stumble upon this. After more than a decade, I doubt anyone even bothers thinking about that zoo anymore except for me, and I'd guess that Ronnie may think about it often as well. There are still scars from that night that will last me a lifetime. The sound of thunder sends a cold chill down my spine and sends me running for cover in a panic. I've imagined seeing the outline of the mammoth beast circling in the clouds, waiting for me to come outside so that it can fly me into the air and drop me. The deafening squawk is the only thing that I can hear as I plummet to earth. My bones snap on impact and everything goes dark, but I'm not dead. The smell of rotting animals awakens me from death. I see the birds pecking away with bloody beaks at the remains of splattered animals. I can't breathe. I can't think. Nothing feels right anymore. Once it passes, I'm fine again, and I can continue to live my life as I have all along, with only one lingering thought in the back of my head that continues to haunt me to this day. They're still out there. One day, those creatures will be hungry again, and the next time, they'll be bigger and looking to eat animals more like Coco instead of baboons. I was a camp counselor over the summer. 3 days into the camp, we took the kids on a nighttime hiking trip into a nearby forested hill. There were 5 of us counselors and 15 kids, all around 12 to 14 years old. We had only hiked for about an hour before coming across a clearing and setting up the fire. While it had gotten dark, the forest wasn't exactly daunting. Safe to say, it was looking to be a pretty uneventful night. I should note that at one point during the hike, one of the counselors, Mike, went to relieve himself in the trees, coming back about 2 minutes later. The only peculiar thing about this occurrence was that he went relatively deep into the woods, probably further than he really needed to. He probably just wanted to make sure that he was absolutely out of sight beforehand. This will be important. As we started cooking up some s'mores, the counselors and campers began telling spooky stories. None of them really stood out. That was until Mike began telling his. "All right, I've got a good one," he said. So, a group of counselors and campers go hiking one night at a summer camp. I rolled my eyes. He was going for that angle. But the kids seemed invested in it, so I just silently listened on. "They go up a small hill," Mike continued, "and then they sit down at a clearing and begin telling campfire stories. Everything seemed normal until one story was interrupted by a sound in the woods. He paused for a second, and right on cue, there was a rustle in some nearby trees. Okay, I thought, that was slightly clever. The kids seemed extremely tense from this, but some of the other counselors were smiling, so I assumed they were in on it. So one of the counselors gets up to go check it out. He then gestured to one of the female counselors, Amy. For a second, Amy looked confused, but Mike just gestured again. Eventually, she took the hint and got up, going towards where the sound occurred. She came back moments later, only to report that there was nothing. She still seemed confused, which caused me to question if she was really in on it or not. Mike went on. When the counselor came back, she said there was nothing there, but she was wrong. Mike smiled, although it was a weird one. something subtly frightening about it. I could sense some genuine fear creeping up on some of the kids' faces as well. There was a tension in the air, Mike went on. Everybody could feel it, but nobody could describe it. I'm not sure if it was just a mental thing, but my skin prickled when he said this. The air around us did indeed feel like it had changed in some inexplicable way. Everybody else looked like they were experiencing something similar, all wrought with faces of discomfort. Another sound came from the woods, he said. This time it was laughter, as unnatural as laughter could get. I nearly had a heart attack when it came from right behind me. Everybody sat still, all too afraid to look. And then they realized something. One of the kids was missing. That was the last straw for Andy, another counselor who stood up. Mike, what the heck is this? Mike didn't respond. Andy scanned the kids and went white. Somebody count them. We did as he asked, counting 14 kids in total. 14. Oh crap, Andy said. What happened? I don't know. Claire, another counselor, spoke up. I swear we were keeping an eye on them the entire time. Andy turned to look at Mike. What the heck is going on, Mike? Mike smiled before continuing his story. During the chaos, they heard footsteps coming from everywhere. Suddenly, a cacophony of heavy stomps began sounding from every direction. Oh my God, Claire shouted. Mike, this is too far, Andy shouted at him. The kids had begun huddling together, fear plastered across their faces. Mike's face suddenly became serious. One of the kids was suddenly dragged into the woods, and Andy went to go chase after them. We heard a scream, and I turned around just in time to see one of the campers disappearing into the forest. I couldn't make out who or what had done it, though. Shoot, Andy yelled out before going after him. Mike let out a cold laugh, but Andy wouldn't get so lucky. Before I could do anything, Amy went after Andy as well. They were dating, leaving Claire and me alone with Mike. I got up, storming over to him and punching him square in the jaw. For some reason, I thought that if I could get him to stop talking, all the madness that was going on would stop as well. Now, I'd say that I'm a pretty strong guy, and I'd put just about everything I had into that punch. But Mike barely reacted to it, even though the strike stung my own hand like crazy. Mike glanced up at me, his face still stuck in that obscure grin. The last two counselors, I turned the other way before he finished the sentence, rounding up the remaining campers and telling them to make a beeline out of there. Claire followed suit, and we began booking it out of the forest. We couldn't hear Mike or whatever following us, so I let myself breathe a bit. Still, I knew that this was going to be hard to explain once we got back. At some point, we saw a figure wandering out of the woods. I stopped in my tracks, not really knowing what to do. The figure groaned as it meandered its way into the moonlight. It was Mike? The actual Mike, I guess. His clothes were torn and his head was bleeding. His chest was also exposed, with what looked like some strange symbol carved into it. I don't remember exactly what it looked like. He looked up at us before asking, "What happened?" in a shaky voice. Before I could respond, he passed out. I began running over to him, but stopped when I heard Claire scream. I turned around to see another camper being dragged into the woods. Screw it, I muttered to myself before yelling at the rest of them to keep going. We left Mike before bolting it the hell out of there. There was some more commotion behind us as we ran, with kids being dragged into the surrounding woods left and right. It couldn't have been helped. At one point, I could hear faint cackling coming from somewhere indistinct, but I knew who it was coming from. When we finally made it down the hill, my lungs were about to collapse. I looked back, seeing that there was only one remaining camper, plus Claire left. Both exhausted and having the blood drained from our faces, we simply stared at each other. And then the kid began smiling. The counselors had escaped, but that wasn't the end of their story, he said in the same tone of voice that the fake Mike had been using. Upon hearing that, I lost it and began running against my body's pleas to rest. I heard Claire once again screaming from behind me, but again, it couldn't be helped. When I got back to the main camp, I entered my cabin to see if my supervisor was there. He wasn't. I was about to go looking for him, but I was so tired that I had to rest first. I made my way over to the bed and plopped down, planning on simply staying there for a few minutes. but when I woke up, there was sunlight bleeding in through the curtains. Somebody was shaking me awake. It was Blake, my supervisor. "Come on, man, get up. Time for breakfast. Go shower first, though. Geez." "Wait," I said to him. "I have to tell you something." "Tell me after you shower," he said before leaving. I got up and chased him into the dining hall. What I saw there made me freeze. All the counselors and campers that had been on the hike, they were all there. Blake turned to face me. "What did you want to talk about? And where's Mike?" I quickly scanned for Mike. I hadn't noticed that he wasn't there the first time. As I began stammering for an answer, the fake campers and counselors all turned to face me simultaneously. That left me at a complete loss for words. I ran out of there, got straight into my car, and floored it. I didn't let myself breathe until I got back on the highway. I didn't want to think about the aftermath, about the implications of leaving a situation like this. I reached into my glove compartment for a pack of smokes, but I felt my hand touch something that wasn't there before. It was a tape recorder. I pulled it out and, against my better judgment, pressed play. A grainy, familiar voice began oozing out of the device. The last counselor thought that he'd gotten away, but little did he know, our paths would soon cross again. My father-in-law is in prison for trying to kill me. Now I know he was trying to be kind. 1 year ago, my father-in-law tried to murder me. He planned it beautifully. The trip up to the cabin in the woods that his family owned, pushing me into the dried-up old well and pickpocketing my phone. He left a gun within the well that gave me the option of killing myself instead of starving to death. His twisted version of mercy, I guess. Either way, he would have gotten away with it. He hadn't accounted for the lost dog, though. He hadn't thought that a couple would come looking for a beloved pet who had raced off after a deer. They found me, half dead from starvation and dehydration, holding the gun and contemplating it seriously after nearly 3 days in the well, fully aware that I was going to die of thirst before starvation. There had been no rain for days. When I woke up in the hospital, my wife Samantha was by my side holding my hand, her beautiful face wet with tears. Despite my own physical pain, all I wanted to do was make her stop crying. So I softly took her hand and, with great effort, raised it to my lips and gave it a gentle kiss. "I was so worried about you. What happened to you?" she begged me, her green eyes bright with tears. The nurse came in and took my vitals, then told my wife that she should leave me to sleep some more. I was glad for the rescue because I knew, once I revealed what had really happened to me, my wife's heart would break permanently. Her father had always been her favorite person. I met Samantha at work 3 years ago. She was the marketing executive and I was a software developer. We were both in our late 20s and I knew within 10 minutes of our first conversation that I was going to marry her. She was bright, funny, clever, and it didn't hurt that she was absolutely gorgeous with bright green eyes and long red hair. 4 months into dating her, she met my family. I come from a massive family where both my parents had 4 siblings each and then went on to have 5 kids together too. Our Sunday lunches are loud, raucous events at my folks' place with at least 20 people in attendance. But Sam was utterly charmed by my family, and my parents and siblings adored her. She fit right in like the missing piece of a jigsaw puzzle. Everything was going so well until Sam decided it was time for me to meet her only family member, her father. Cameron Joyce was a tall, burly man who dressed and looked like a lumberjack. He lived in a neighborhood at the very edge of the suburbs, close to a big, wide forest. When he stiffly shook my hand, his blue eyes ice cold, a sort of chill ran through me. After we walked into the 2-bedroom house behind him, the first red flag should have been that there were no photos of Sam's mother. Not one. In fact, if I truly thought about it, Sam never really spoke about her mother. I should have asked more questions about her, but I guess I always just assumed that the subject was too painful for her. The first time I thought her father was trying to kill me was a fleeting thought which happened during that visit. I distinctly heard Sam tell her father over the phone multiple times that I had a nut allergy, but when we sat down to eat, I started to feel my throat swell up. Sam's father watched me cough, slowly chewing his food. Of course, we had an EpiPen on us, but if we hadn't, I could be dead right now. Then there was the time right after our wedding. He knew I couldn't swim, but I am 90% sure he pushed me into the lake when the three of us were on the docks looking at his boat. The third time was the charm, though. If those hikers hadn't found me, I'm sure I would have died down in that well. You might be wondering why I chose to go to that cabin with a man I thought was trying to kill me. Because I really didn't think he was trying to kill me. My brain insisted that I had misread or misheard the situation, and both those incidents could have been accidents. Also, Sam was keen for her father and her husband to get along, and I just couldn't break her heart. I'll never forget the ride to the cabin. My father-in-law was a man of few words, so when he decided to tell me a story, I almost sighed with relief that I didn't have to keep talking to fill the dead air between us. He kept his eyes on the road and said, "There was once a boy who lived a happy life with his family in the forest. It was him, his 3 brothers, his parents, his grandparents, his uncles and aunts, and all his cousins. He didn't know much about the world beyond his family home, but he had 1,000 things to do in the woods, so he never wondered. For a time, all was well and as it should be. The boy and his family lived off the land, hunted, and thrived. Until one day on his 19th birthday, the boy saw the woman in white in the gut of the trees. Ethereal and shimmering, she glowed like a white will-o'-the-wisp. When he asked his mother about her, she told him to stay away from the woman, that nothing good comes out of the woods on a sickle moon night. We were close to the cabin now, and as we approached it, a strange sort of feeling was beginning to crawl up my spine. A sense of something being wrong gripped me tightly. The boy listened to his mother. For 2 days, he did not go looking for the woman. On the 3rd night, he found himself outside the house, walking into the woods. As he drew closer, he saw the woman's face. Her gold hair shimmered all the way to her knees, ice blue eyes, and a lovely face that glowed with the promise of a forever his mortal brain didn't understand. The woman offered him her hand. Entranced, he reached out and took it. He parked and turned off the engine of the car, but still wouldn't look at me. Instead, he stared ahead into the depth of the forest as he told me this eerie tale. The minute he took that hand, the thing claimed him. They found him a year later at the top of a mountain, living in a cave, naked and insane, speaking a strange tongue in a language which had to be made up. What was terrifying was that both his legs from his knees downward were gone, and yet the wounds had been cauterized, and someone or something had clearly been feeding him. His parents brought him home and tried to help him recover his mind. The doctors fitted him with prosthetic legs he kept hidden away. But the boy was never really the same again. When he began to slowly speak again, he spoke of a woman with a skull instead of a face, a long skeletal crone's body, fangs instead of teeth, clumps of white hair that fell out of her head, and milk-white eyes, the eyes of a corpse. And then, finally, the ear-piercing scream. He fell silent then, and with my skin crawling, I asked him, what happened to him? My father-in-law broke out of his trance and looked at me, his expression unreadable. Let me show you how to hunt. The trial was short. My father-in-law was caught in possession of my phone and several other items that suggested what he planned to do. His internet search history revealed extensive ways to murder someone. When they put Cameron Joyce in prison, my wife cried herself to sleep every night for a month. I think she blamed me for what happened, even though she would never say those words. I would catch her looking out from our apartment in the direction of the forest, which we could see clearly. She grew more and more forgetful, wouldn't go to work, and would sleep all day. Some days she wouldn't even brush her hair. Her face grew more haggard, and sometimes when I saw her naked form in bed in the moonlight, I could swear I saw her ribs through her translucent skin. Her sadness was going to devour her, and there was nothing I could do about it. One day I came home and she wasn't there. I looked for her everywhere. I don't know how I knew it, but somehow I knew she would be at the cabin. I jumped into my car and sped there at full speed, not caring how many fines I would have to pay. I got there just before dark and I caught sight of her. She was naked, her back to me, facing the forest. "Sam," I called her name as I got out of the car. She didn't turn to look at me. Instead, she stood there, her messy red hair lifted by the breeze. I called to her again, a deep sense of unease in my bones. "Sam." Slowly, she turned to face me, and that was when I saw her face. A skull. A distended jaw that opened much, much too wide. That was when she let out an ear-piercing scream. A sharp pain burst through my head, and I immediately clapped my hands over my ears. I tried screaming my wife's name again, but all I could hear was the shriek that was starting to feel like someone was knifing my brain. My vision swam and I stumbled backward. A dozen figures had appeared from the woods. All of them had skull-like faces, impossibly distended jaws, and the same milk-white eyes that had replaced my wife's bright green ones. And they were all walking toward me. I didn't even think. I got into my car and started the engine, my ears bleeding from the sound of the scream. I ran. 2 days later, I was couch surfing at a friend's house after the doctors had dealt with one perforated eardrum. They told me I was lucky both my eardrums hadn't burst from the volume I was listening to music at. I had just nodded and let them get on with it. There was a ringing in my ears I couldn't quite get rid of, no matter how I tried. There was no way I could explain what had happened in those woods to them. I'm waiting for the ringing and the headache to stop before I go looking for Sam again. This time I will take a gun. I'll find her and bring her home. I've already spoken to the police, but I know they just aren't as motivated to find her as I am. My phone rang and I gingerly held it to my good ear. It was a collect call from the prison. I accepted it, because who else could possibly give me answers? It happened, didn't it? My father-in-law's gruff voice made me nearly drop the phone. I swallowed hard. Sam's gone, I said numbly. She's gone back where she belongs, he said. You're lucky. How am I lucky? I asked, bitter anger surging through me. She was my wife. And your daughter. That thing was no daughter nor a wife. It knows how to mimic being human. Why do you think I told you that story? His voice was low and even. My jaw dropped. Was he really suggesting he was the boy from the dark fairy tale he had told? You're cruel. Disowning your daughter, trying to kill me, you should... Listen to me, boy, and listen good. That creature was dropped at my doorstep a few months after I came home from the forest. It was an infant then, and it butchered my parents. I found pieces of them around their cabin for years. It then proceeded to kill everyone related to me, but it wouldn't let me die or kill me, and I couldn't figure out why until I realized it needed me the way a parasite needs its host. Finally, when everyone I loved was dead and buried, it needed more prey, and it found you. It will take pieces of you, then keep you alive to take pieces of everyone you love. It will feed on your pain as you live through your own horror show. I swallowed hard. He had lost his mind, surely. What on earth was he trying to say? If I were you, I would take all my belongings and leave. Leave the state. Hell, leave the country. Don't ever look back, you hear me? Ever. With a sharp click, he hung up. I wish I had listened to him. I wish I hadn't decided that I needed to rescue my wife at any cost. Instead, I am sitting here in the dark inside the old cabin, looking outside the window, my fingers folded around the hunting rifle. A sickle moon gleams silver, the only light in the jet-black night. And there, inside the darkness, I think I see a figure shimmer. From a distance, she almost looks like my wife. Almost. Until her inhuman skeletal jaw distends, and she screams.